Investigators froze when they found this inside the concrete block. When demolition workers struck their sledgehammers against an ordinary concrete block in an abandoned warehouse, they expected dust and rubble. What they found instead would bring a dozen police cars screaming to the scene within the hour. This discovery would unravel a mystery that had haunted a small town for over 2 decades. It was a cold Tuesday morning in March when the Henderson brothers' demolition crew arrived at the old Riverside storage facility. The building had stood vacant for 15 years, slowly decaying on the edge of town. Now, finally, it was scheduled for demolition to make way for a new shopping center. The structure loomed against the gray sky, its windows shattered, walls covered in graffiti, a monument to abandonment and forgotten memories. Mike Torres, a veteran demolition worker with 20 years of experience, was assigned to clear out the basement. Row after row of concrete support columns lined the underground space, each one identical to the next. Or so he thought. The air down there was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. Water had seeped through the foundation over the years, creating pools in the corners and rust stains that streaked down the walls like tears. Mike had demolished hundreds of buildings in his career. He knew the rhythm of destruction, the way different materials responded to force, the sounds they made as they gave way. That morning, working methodically through the basement, he was moving from column to column, assessing their structure and planning the safest way to bring them down. "I remember the sound," Mike would later tell investigators, his voice still carrying the weight of that moment. "When my sledgehammer hit that particular column, it didn't sound right. It was hollow." He paused, replaying the memory. In 20 years, you develop an ear for these things. Concrete has a voice. This one was whispering something different. Most concrete columns ring solid when struck, a dull, heavy thud that reverberates through your arms. This one echoed. It was subtle but unmistakable. Mike stopped, stepped back, and hit it again. The same hollow sound. His pulse quickened. Hollow spaces in structural concrete could mean deterioration, could mean danger. But something about this felt deliberate. Mike called over his supervisor, Jerry Henderson, who had been working upstairs. Jerry came down, listened to Mike's explanation, and struck the column himself. His expression changed immediately. Without a word, they carefully began chipping away at the outer layer of concrete. The material came away easier than it should have, and soon they understood why. This wasn't a solid support column at all. It was a shell, carefully constructed to look identical to the others, but hiding something within. What they found beneath made Mike's hands start shaking. Embedded in the column was a sealed metal container, roughly the size of a large suitcase, wrapped in plastic and secured with chains. The metal showed no signs of rust, suggesting it had been carefully protected before being encased. Mike immediately dropped his tools and dialed 911. Jerry stood staring at the container, his mind racing through possibilities. Nothing good gets hidden inside concrete. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Then came the detectives. Then the crime scene investigators. Within an hour, the basement of the old Riverside storage facility had transformed into a full-scale investigation scene. Bright portable lights were erected, crime scene tape cordoned off the area, and specialists in protective gear carefully worked to extract the container without damaging whatever might be inside. Detective Sarah Chen, a veteran of the cold case unit, was called to the scene. She had worked dozens of unsolved cases over her career, and something about this discovery sent a chill through her. Concrete was forever. Whatever someone had hidden this way, they never intended it to be found. The extraction took hours. They couldn't simply smash through the remaining concrete. Every action had to be careful, methodical, documented. Finally, as afternoon shadows began to lengthen outside, the container was freed. It was heavier than it looked, and when they set it on a tarp in the center of the basement, everyone present seemed to hold their breath. Detective Chen photographed it from every angle before attempting to open it. The chains were old but still strong. The lock had corroded, but they brought in specialized tools. When the container finally opened, the seal breaking with a hiss of air that had been trapped for decades, several investigators stepped back involuntarily. Inside was a collection of personal belongings that looked like a time capsule from another era. Purse, worn but well-made. Pair of glasses. A small collection of photographs. A silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Credit cards and an ID, all bearing the same name and face. And most chillingly, a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with tight, careful handwriting. But that wasn't what made the investigators freeze. What stopped them cold was the name on that ID. Rebecca Morrison. Detective Chen felt the blood drain from her face. She knew that name. Every detective in the department knew that name. Rebecca Morrison had been one of their ghosts, one of the cases that haunted the halls and kept investigators awake at night. Rebecca Morrison was a 23-year-old graduate student who had vanished without a trace in 1998. She had been bright, ambitious, studying criminal justice at the State University with dreams of becoming a lawyer. She came from a good family, had a wide circle of friends, no history of mental health issues, no reason to simply disappear. But on a Wednesday evening in October, she had failed to show up for dinner with her parents. Her apartment was undisturbed. Her car was in its usual spot. Her purse, everyone had assumed, was with her. But there was no sign of Rebecca herself. For 25 years, her family had lived with questions that had no answers. Where had she gone? What had happened to her? Was she alive somewhere, living a different life? Had she been taken? The case had consumed resources, generated hundreds of leads, involved FBI assistance, and ultimately gone cold. The file sat in the archives, inches thick, a monument to frustration and failure. Now, pieces of her life were laid out on a tarp in a warehouse basement, and Detective Chen knew with absolute certainty that they weren't going to find Rebecca alive. The journal was carefully bagged as evidence and transported to the station. That evening, Detective Chen sat in the conference room with her partner, Detective Marcus Webb, and the case file from 1998 spread before them. With gloved hands, she opened Rebecca's journal and began to read. What she discovered in those pages would change everything they thought they knew. The journal entries began 6 months before Rebecca's disappearance. They started innocently enough. Daily observations about classes, friends, family. But gradually, a different thread began to weave through the pages. Rebecca had been working as a part-time bookkeeper at the Riverside storage facility to help pay for school. It was supposed to be simple work. Logging inventory, tracking shipments, maintaining records. Easy money for a few hours a week. But Rebecca had a meticulous mind and a natural curiosity, the very traits that would have made her an excellent lawyer. She began noticing inconsistencies. Shipments that arrived but weren't properly documented. Inventory that appeared in the records but never physically existed. Money flowing through accounts that didn't match the volume of business the warehouse appeared to be doing. At first, she assumed it was poor bookkeeping by previous employees. She even tried to correct the errors. Then she started noticing the patterns. Certain shipments always arrived at night. Certain trucks had no company logos. Certain men who came to oversee these special deliveries made everyone else nervous. Rebecca, demonstrating both intelligence and recklessness, began documenting everything. She made copies of shipping manifests. She recorded license plate numbers. She noted dates, times, and descriptions of the men involved. The journal revealed that the Riverside storage facility wasn't just storing legitimate goods. It was a hub for a sophisticated smuggling operation. Rebecca's careful documentation painted a picture of a network that moved stolen goods, potentially drugs, and used the warehouse as a distribution point for a 6-state region. The operation was clever, hiding behind the legitimate business, using the constant flow of normal shipments as cover. Detective Chan read with growing horror as Rebecca's entries became more detailed and more dangerous. The young woman had compiled enough evidence to dismantle an entire criminal organization. But she had been alone with this knowledge, and the journal revealed her growing fear. "I think they're watching me," one entry read. "Carl asked me today why I was so interested in the night shipments. I played it off like curiosity, but his eyes. I don't think he believed me. Found out today that Mr. Hutchinson owns part of the warehouse," another entry stated. "He's always been nice to me, but now I wonder if that's why he hired me. Young, inexperienced, not likely to ask questions. But I've been asking questions, and I think they're starting to notice." The entries became shorter, more hurried, as if Rebecca was racing against time. She had begun making copies of everything, storing them in different locations. The container in the concrete was her final insurance policy. Then Detective Chen reached the last pages, and her hands began to tremble. Rebecca had been planning to go to the police. She had an appointment scheduled with a detective at the state police barracks, someone she thought she could trust, someone outside the local department. The appointment was set for a Thursday afternoon. Rebecca disappeared on the Wednesday before that Thursday. Her final entry, written in a hand that showed signs of stress, was dated 3 days before she was reported missing. Detective Chan read it aloud to Marcus, her voice breaking. "If anyone finds this, I didn't run away. I didn't leave my family. They found out what I know. I saw them following me today, and I'm scared. I'm hiding this tomorrow, and then I'm going to try to get out of town until I can meet with Detective Morrison at the state police. If something happens before then, if I don't make it, tell my parents I love them more than anything. Tell them I tried to do the right thing. The truth is in these pages. All the names, all the evidence. They can't hide from this. Please make sure justice is served." The conference room fell silent. Detective Chan closed the journal carefully, her mind already racing ahead to the investigation they were about to launch. Marcus picked up the 1998 case file and began cross-referencing the names Rebecca had documented with the original investigation records. What they discovered made both detectives furious. Several of the names in Rebecca's journal had been mentioned during the original investigation. Friends had reported that Rebecca seemed nervous. A co-worker at the warehouse had told police that Rebecca had been asking a lot of questions about the business. These leads had been followed up, documented in the file, and then nothing. The trails had gone cold. Reports indicated that interviews had been conducted but yielded nothing suspicious. Alibis had been confirmed. The warehouse had been examined and found to be legitimate. Someone had buried those leads. Someone had made sure the investigation never looked too closely at the Riverside storage facility and the men who ran it. Within hours of reading the journal, the cold case unit mobilized. They couldn't move openly, not yet. If corruption had protected these criminals once, it might still exist in some form. Detective Chen contacted the state police and the FBI. By midnight, a joint task force had been assembled. The names in Rebecca's journal led investigators to a web of corruption that extended far beyond a simple smuggling ring. Over the next 48 hours, as they discreetly gathered information, the scope of what Rebecca had discovered became clear. The operation had been massive, moving millions of dollars in stolen goods and illegal substances over the course of years. And it had continued operating for 2 decades after Rebecca's disappearance, protected by carefully placed bribes and the murder of one curious young woman who had gotten too close to the truth. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after Mike Torres's sledgehammer had struck that hollow column, the task force made their move. Coordinated raids hit 6 locations simultaneously. 3 former warehouse employees were arrested at their homes. 2 current employees of other businesses that had ties to the original operation, were taken into custody. And one arrest shocked the entire community. David Hutchinson, now a respected businessman who owned a chain of storage facilities across 3 states, was arrested at his office. He was the same Mr. Hutchinson that Rebecca had mentioned in her journal, the one who had hired her, the one whose suspicious interest in her questions had frightened her. He had built an empire on the foundation of that criminal operation, going legitimate over the years but never facing justice for what had been done. The interrogations lasted for days. 2 of the suspects immediately lawyered up and said nothing. But David Hutchinson, faced with the evidence from Rebecca's journal and the forensic accounting that showed money trails stretching back 25 years, broke down during his 3rd interview. Detective Chen sat across from him, Rebecca's journal on the table between them. "She was just trying to do the right thing," Chen said quietly. "She was 23 years old, and she was braver than you ever were." Hutchinson's hands shook as he reached for a glass of water. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt. That's what I told them. But she wouldn't stop asking questions. She figured it out, all of it. We knew she was making copies, knew she was planning something. They said if we didn't handle it, we'd all go down." "They?" Chen leaned forward. "Who gave the order? What came next would expand the investigation even further." Hutchinson named names, and one of them made Detective Chen's blood run cold. Richard Paulson, who had been a detective with the local police department in 1998, had been on the payroll. He had been the one who ensured that any investigation into the warehouse went nowhere. He had personally interviewed several witnesses and had written reports that minimized their concerns and steered the investigation away from the truth. Paulson had retired 5 years ago and moved to Florida, but he was still within reach of justice. The case grew more complex with each revelation. Hutchinson admitted that Rebecca had been killed the night before she was supposed to meet with the state police. She had been grabbed outside her apartment, driven to a remote location, and murdered. Her body had been disposed of in a way that, Hutchinson claimed, ensured it would never be found. To this day, despite extensive searches and Hutchinson's cooperation, Rebecca's remains have not been recovered. That information has not been disclosed to the public, a final dignity afforded to her family, allowing them some privacy in their grief. The trial began 8 months after the discovery of the concrete container. It became one of the most high-profile cases in the state's history, drawing national media attention. The prosecution built their case on Rebecca's journal, on forensic accounting, on the testimony of former associates who turned state's evidence, and on the corruption that had allowed these crimes to continue unpunished for so long. The defense tried to discredit the journal, to argue that the evidence was old and unreliable, that their clients had reformed their lives. But the documentation was too detailed, too accurate. Rebecca had been thorough in her investigation, and her words from beyond the grave were damning. Rebecca's family attended every day of the trial. Her mother, Patricia Morrison, now in her 70s, sat in the front row with Rebecca's father beside her. They had never stopped looking for their daughter, never stopped hoping for answers. The discovery had broken their hearts all over again, but it had also given them something they had been denied for 25 years. The truth. When the verdicts came in, all 7 defendants were found guilty on multiple charges. The sentences ranged from 25 years to life in prison. David Hutchinson received life without the possibility of parole for murder and racketeering. Richard Paulson, the corrupt former detective, received 40 years for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, and corruption. Patricia Morrison was given the opportunity to speak at the sentencing hearing. She stood at the podium, a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had cried too many tears. Her voice was steady as she addressed the court. "For 25 years, my husband and I lived in a nightmare of not knowing. Every day we wondered if Rebecca was alive somewhere, if she was in pain, if she was trying to get back to us. We celebrated her birthday every year, not knowing if we were celebrating or mourning. We kept her room exactly as she left it, hoping she would walk through our door and everything would be okay again. That hope was torture, but we couldn't let it go because we didn't know. She paused, composing herself. Rebecca was brilliant and brave. She was studying to become a lawyer because she believed in justice. She believed that the law was supposed to protect people and punish those who hurt others. She tried to do the right thing, and it cost her everything. These men took our daughter from us. They took her future, her dreams, her life. And then they went on living theirs, building businesses, raising families, sleeping peacefully in their beds while we lay awake wondering if our little girl was cold somewhere or scared or calling for us. Patricia looked directly at the defendants. But Rebecca's courage, even in those final days when she knew she was in danger, brought justice not just for her, but for everyone these criminals had hurt over the years. She left us a final gift, the truth. She made sure that even if she couldn't bring you to justice herself, someone eventually would. My daughter died trying to do what was right, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure people know that. She was a hero, and you are exactly what she said you were. Criminals who deserved to face the consequences of your actions. The courtroom was silent as Patricia returned to her seat. Several jurors were crying. Even the judge seemed moved, taking a moment before pronouncing the sentences. The warehouse where the concrete block stood has since been demolished, as originally planned. But the shopping center that was supposed to replace it never materialized. Instead, after a campaign led by Patricia Morrison and supported by the community, the land was transformed into a memorial park. It opened 2 years after the trial concluded, a peaceful space with walking paths, benches, and gardens. At the center of the park stands a statue dedicated to Rebecca Morrison. It depicts a young woman holding a book, her face turned toward the future she never got to see. The inscription on the base reads, Rebecca Morrison, 1975 to 1998. She stood for truth when it was dangerous to do so. Her courage brought light to darkness and justice to those who thought they were beyond its reach. But the statue isn't just for Rebecca. Around the base are plaques bearing the names of other victims of violent crimes whose cases went unsolved, whose voices were silenced, whose families still seek answers. The park is called the Unsilenced Memorial, a place to remember those who were taken and to renew the commitment to seeking justice, no matter how long it takes. The case had ripple effects beyond the immediate prosecutions. The local police department underwent a complete review of its cold case files, looking for other instances where corruption might have buried the truth. The state implemented new oversight procedures for evidence handling and case management. And the story of Rebecca Morrison became part of the curriculum at the State University's Criminal Justice Program, a reminder of both the importance of ethical conduct and the danger that can come from standing up to corruption. Mike Torres, the demolition worker who made the discovery, never went back to that kind of work. The experience had shaken him profoundly. He still thinks about that day, about the sound of his sledgehammer against the concrete, about what might have happened if they had started their demolition on a different side of the basement, with a different column. Sometimes I wonder, he says, sitting in his living room where a framed photo of Rebecca sits on the mantel, placed there by Patricia Morrison after she met him to thank him personally. If Rebecca somehow guided us to that exact column, out of 50 identical supports in that basement, what were the odds we'd start with that one? We could have hit any of them first. The crew usually works from east to west, but that morning, Jerry decided we should start from the west side because the lighting was better. That decision brought us to Rebecca's column. He pauses, looking at her photograph, at the young woman frozen in time, smiling at a camera 27 years ago. It's like she was still fighting, even after all those years, to make sure the truth came out. She had hidden that evidence so carefully, protected it so well. And then at exactly the right moment, when that building was finally coming down, she made sure someone found it. I don't know if I believe in that kind of thing, spirits or fate or whatever. But I believe in Rebecca. I believe she was the kind of person who wouldn't give up, even after death. And that column, that hollow sound. Maybe it was her way of saying, "I'm here. I'm still here. Don't forget about me." The concrete block that contained Rebecca Morrison's final message has been preserved as evidence, stored in a climate-controlled facility. Eventually, when all legal proceedings are complete, it will be displayed at the State Museum's Justice and History exhibit, a silent testament to one woman's determination to be heard, even from beyond the grave. Her journal, those pages that investigators found that day, ensured that the truth could not stay buried forever. The Morrison family has found a measure of peace, though the pain of losing Rebecca will never fully heal. They established the Rebecca Morrison Scholarship Fund, which provides financial assistance to criminal justice students who demonstrate both academic excellence and a commitment to ethical practice. Every year, 3 students receive the scholarship, and every year, Patricia Morrison meets with them personally to tell them about her daughter, to make sure Rebecca's story continues to inspire the next generation of people who will stand up for what's right. Detective Sarah Chen keeps a photograph of Rebecca on her desk, a constant reminder of why the work matters. She successfully campaigned for the formation of a dedicated task force to review cold cases with potential corruption angles, and she leads that unit now. In the 5 years since Rebecca's case was solved, Chen's team has reopened and solved 11 other cold cases, bringing justice to families who had lost hope. Sometimes the walls really do have secrets. Sometimes those secrets are terrible truths that people have tried desperately to hide. But sometimes, despite all efforts to bury them in concrete and silence, despite years or decades passing, despite the death of witnesses and the fading of memories, those secrets find a way to be revealed. They wait for the right moment, the right person, the right circumstances. And when that moment comes, the truth emerges, undeniable and powerful, demanding the justice that was delayed but never truly denied. Rebecca Morrison made sure of that. In her final act, knowing she was in danger, she created a time capsule of truth. She sealed up the evidence that would eventually bring down her killers, wrapped it carefully, and hid it in concrete, in a place where it would wait as long as necessary. 25 years turned out to be how long it took. 25 years of her parents wondering, of her friends remembering, of her case file gathering dust. But the truth was patient, because Rebecca had made it immortal. The concrete couldn't hold it forever. And when those walls finally came down, when Mike Torres's sledgehammer struck that column and heard that hollow echo, Rebecca's voice finally broke free. After 25 years of silence, she spoke. And investigators, prosecutors, judges, and juries listened. And justice, delayed but not defeated, finally prevailed. What do you think? Could you work in a place knowing it might hold dark secrets, that the very walls around you might contain evidence of crimes long forgotten? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that will leave you stunned.